Okay. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Apex Planning Board meeting. Today is March 10th, 2025. I'd like to start off the meeting with the invocation. Mr. Braswell, would you mind leading us off?
Thank you, sir. Please bow your heads. Dear Lord, we're thankful to be gathered here today. Please lead, guide, and direct us in our decisions for this great town. These things we ask in your name. Amen.
Amen. Everybody, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Do we have any new items this morning before we go into public comment? Anything new?
Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Ms. Diane.
All right, so the one item we have is the S-Line Mobility Hub. There'll be a presentation at a town council work session. It's Tuesday, March 18th at 3:30. It'll be in Town Hall Training Room 3A, but it is live streamed on YouTube if you all would like to watch it.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Diane. Okay, at this time, I'd like to open up the public comment section. Public comment is to allow the public to speak on items that do not appear on this agenda. Seeing the crowd of nearly no one, I'm assuming we do not have anybody here for public comment. Okay, so I'll go ahead and close the public comment and move on to the consent item number 1, which is under the, let's see here, meeting minutes from previous, didn't make it on here. Meeting minutes from the February 10th meeting. I'm assuming everybody has read the February 10th agenda meeting minutes. Any questions, any changes, omissions? Seeing that there are none, do I have a motion to approve?
I'd like to make a motion to approve.
Okay, we have a motion to approve.
Second.
We have a second by Daniel. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, motion carries. Okay, moving into the new business. Item number 1, we have Bruce. I have to have you say your last name.
Absolutely, it's Venable.
Venable.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair and board members. I have a unique situation for you today. We have a proposal to amend our UDO, and this is an applicant-driven, so it's not coming directly from the staff, it's coming from an applicant. East West Partners is requesting to amend Section 8.7 signs to add a projecting sign as a permitted permanent sign type in all the zoning districts and to set forth standards and other such requirements for the signage itself. Currently, this type of sign is only permitted in the small town character overlay district, so this would open it up to every other type of district as well. I will say that staff has worked closely with this applicant on kind of coming up with standards and different types of criteria that we think is appropriate, and we do support this amendment today. Oh, looks like the slides got a little mixed up. So the first amendment part of this will be 8.7 here. This is typically where we'd have our permitted sign table. Here you can see that we're adding number 20, which is projecting. And you can see that we're allowing it for specific residential uses, commercial uses, industrial uses, and office institutional uses as well. And it is allowed to be illuminated per the code and the standards we've set. So some of the standards that will be attached to this for the projecting signs, it has to be affixed to a building in a manner that the leading edge doesn't extend more than 12 inches beyond the surface of the building or wall and meets the conditions below. Some of the conditions to make you aware of is that the projecting signs must be at a minimum of 9 feet high. So the bottom of the sign can't be below 9 feet at all. The projection sign cannot extend more than 5 feet from the building itself. So you have the sign, you have the building, you have the brackets, you have the sign. The sign itself cannot be more than 5 feet out for you there. We are proposing this as an alternative to a traditional wall sign. So when a single tenant could come in and say, I think my business would do better with this projection sign versus a wall sign. So on a street-facing facade, we will allow them to have the projection sign instead of a wall sign. They're not permitted to have both on the same facade. And if they have multiple street-facing frontage, they're allowed to have at least one per street-facing frontage. Here we lay out a table, kind of the maximum sign area that we're proposing for these signs themselves. I don't know if you walked around anywhere and you've seen the nice little projecting signs when they're on the ground floor. You don't want them too big, so we're proposing a very, what we feel is a moderate size of 12 square feet for ground floor. And then we've kind of designed this so that as you go up and you can be between the floors, it can get a little bit bigger so you can have more exposure as you're higher up, far away from people, there's no obstruction. So between the ground and second story, we're proposing 18 square feet. Between second and third, 32 square feet. And then third story and above would be our max at 48 square feet. The outside edge of the projecting sign, we already talked about that, should not be more than 5 feet. The sign itself will be subject to all the typical standards. So we have 8.7.4 design and color requirements, 8.7.5 master sign plan requirements, and lastly 8.7.3 sign measurement, and then also our sign illumination section of 8.6.b. So projecting signs, sometimes you may see them in areas near right-of-ways, near roads and streets. Some jurisdictions allow them to extend a certain distance. We're proposing, which is in line with some other neighboring jurisdictions, is that they have to get an encroachment agreement prior to going into any of the right-of-ways in the town of Apex. In this small picture here, this is I apologize, it's a little hard to see, but these are just some general examples of what a projecting sign might look like. Here we're adding some text to section 8.7.6b4. The underlined bolded section is what we're adding. This speaks to how typically we allow signs to be internally illuminated. We're saying that they can be internally illuminated, but provided, however, projecting signs shall be allowed to be internally illuminated only with the use of individual face or edge-lit halo letters, logos, and design forms with a maximum of 1/2 inch visible acrylic on a common cabinet. And I'm going to show you what that looks like, because it's like, what does that mean? So there's a lot of different types. Halo lighting is a very nice, it's probably a more expensive way to do it. You get that nice contrast of the light behind it, and then the solid opaque letters, it kind of sticks out. It looks really nice. This example here is that 1/2 inch. So it's not too bright. You may see some of these, if you easily can Google it or drive around a town, you may see some of them where the light is so bright it's kind of blinding, kind of off-putting. So we went for a very modest. This is something we can always change in the future if we find that it's not bright enough or doesn't serve the purpose. But right now, we think this is a very adequate and safe way to approach it. The one on the other side, this is an individual sign face example. So this is all flush. None of the letters do not extend. They're not channel letters that protrude. They're flat, but we do require that it has an opaque background so that the letters themselves are the only thing that's lit. So you're not getting that blinding cabinet lighting effect.
Bruce,
Yes, sir.
while you're on that,
Yeah.
For example, on the one on the right, the Encore, I had a question, and I guess I'll just go ahead and just dive into it right now. On, are we differentiating, or does the ordinance separately define a marquee? And so I guess part of where my question is on this is, for example, on that Encore one that has the opaque background, where it's got those individual bulbs around the perimeter, can those flash or move that you might find in a marquee example?
So marquee is mentioned in the UDO. This is designed not to flash, not to be flashing or distracting or anything like that. This would be all solid lit. Essentially, it's being lit internally from the rear, and this would just be one solid color, so you don't have any of that distracting things
Great.
like that.
Okay. Thank you very much. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, you're fine. So that's it for this. The applicant unfortunately wasn't able to make it today, so but this will be advancing the town council in the next month or so. So if you guys have any questions, if not, you may make a motion whether you wish to push this forward or not. Town staff did work closely with them, like I said before, and we feel that this is fair and this is something that will provide a new options and diversity to our signage in Apex.
Bruce, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Are there specific language or any, I guess, language of limitations of color, intensity, brightness?
Yep. So we have that laid out in the sign section specifically itself. We have limits on the types of color. We have limits on how bright the signs themselves can be, how they can be lit. All of those still apply to this here too.
So in the summary, it says that this was currently only permitted in the small town character overlay district. Do these standards differ? Are we creating two separate standards? One for projecting signs in the downtown?
So they kind of exist already. That is a good
Right.
question. So this with the small town character overlay, we're saying we picked a very specific standards we want to see there. So they're going to be different.
There.
So it's kind of the same effect, right? So what's in the small town overlay has been approved and passed part of the UDO. That's kind of what has to go there. We're just opening up this type of sign to be used elsewhere, and the size is probably going to be very different. The size of itself will be much different than what you would see in a small town character overlay.
But if I had 12 tenants, I could have 12 signs.
I have to double check. I'm sorry, I don't know off the top of my head
It
if
just says
what the.
projecting one per tenant.
Oh, so one per tenant. I mean, yeah, this would be in a multi-use building, so yeah, there's a potential that there could be multiple signs. You drive by a big building that has maybe 4 floors, you might see multiple signs. Ideally, we're hoping, these will all come in for review as well, and that, the individual property owners and tenants themselves will have to hopefully design something that's appropriate. But we'll always give them guidance and direction if we think we see too many projecting signs lining up in a way we feel that is, one, not beneficial to what Apex's intent is here, and also what would be best for their product as well.
Well, overall, I think they're very attractive and
They are, right? Yeah.
look good.
Random question. Because this comes from East West Partners, do they currently have a project that will benefit from this, or how did they approach you?
Yeah, they're working. I think the East West is working in tandem with 499, the Depot, and so there's a bunch of. I think they're building a 4-story building there with multiple tenants, and so I think working with them, they had some signs. They had some signs in mind for what they might want to see and use there, and that was a give and take of going back and forth. Like, oh, we think this is a very beautiful classic design, and we're like, no, that's a bit too much for Apex. So we had to find a good common ground there. Took some back and forth. They were really receptive.
Now that's interesting. Both of you bring up a really good point. If you did, so let's step away from Depot 499, I guess, for a second, because I can't imagine any of those mixed-use buildings yet, because they're probably not up right now.
Oh, no.
Everything's going up right now is all
They're
residential,
very
right?
vertical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh no, I know they're very vertical, but there's no mixed-use buildings up yet. They're all residential, and so, so I guess I'm going to borrow from the building like where Fratelli's is. Does anybody know where that is? What's that development?
Sweetwater.
I'm sorry, Sweetwater. Yes. So the first floor or the second floor of those multi-tenant, you might have a vertical. What is that? Some of those are 5 and 6 stories, but multiple tenants. How would that work? Because I heard your response. We would work with them to make sure that it is consistent. But if there's an entitlement there, there's an entitlement there. Mm-hmm. And so, how would that work if every tenant in that building where Fratelli's is in Sweetwater wanted one? How would that work?
We would probably approach it. I mean, realistically, what the code will allow us to do is approach it the same way we would approach wall signs. We would say, okay, you're permitted one wall sign for this facade. You're welcome to put it in front of your storefront, and then they would have to locate the position of where that would go on the building itself. I think what I got from your questions was a concern of maybe one just safety to appearance and like how organized it would look, what it might be like as an end product with all these different projecting signs. That might be something to have further conversations on. But essentially, you know, not all of them are probably going to want to go with this more expensive type of sign either. So there's a lot of factors, and I think it serves some tenants more than others. But you know, it would really, we do allow it on multiple floors, and they're allowed to do different sizes. So potentially they would have the ability to do their own projecting sign in that area.
Okay, and so in that kind of in that vein, the figures that were chosen that progressively enlarge as you go up in stories, how was that chosen? How were those figures chosen? Were they borrowed from another jurisdiction, or was there some methodology as to why those figures are what they are?
Yeah, absolutely. So we looked at probably 10 different jurisdictions around us, from Mooresville, Cary. We looked at larger cities like Durham, Raleigh. We looked at Wilmington, because downtown Wilmington is a great example of a lot of projecting signs. And different jurisdictions, they all varied. Some of them were just straight, you can have a projecting sign and it can be 60 square feet. We don't care. Some of them, Cary had like some, like, it could be 6 square feet in some overlay districts and things like that. So we went more based off of Wilmington, because we thought they had a good example of the smaller sign, and because as you're walking down their main street, you could see the storefronts would have the small sign, and then they'd have these larger historic buildings that were using these marquees that looked beautiful. They looked great. They added to the ambiance and kind of the feel of the character of the area. So we looked at about 10 different jurisdictions, and we kind of struggled with the size, and we wanted to make sure that the first floor didn't feel too out of place. We think that the 12-foot is in line kind of what you would see in downtown Wilmington, where it just looks right. You're walking by, you can easily see what it is, and it's a nice sign.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Bruce, on the side note of Wilmington, I was recently there, and when I first saw this projecting, I did see signage in downtown Wilmington where it was literally projecting down onto the sidewalk. So that's what I initially thought this was.
Oh, sure.
And I was
Yeah.
Oh, what is causing this
Yeah.
kind of request?
Yeah.
So this is much more palatable, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
Great job on your presentation.
Oh, thank you, sir. If there's no more questions, I'll leave it to the board to discuss.
Any more
Just have
questions?
one more
Bruce?
question.
Yes, sir, absolutely.
I think in the UDO, this requires the building owner's approval. Is that still the case with these signs with,
The property owner will have to work with the tenant to.
Sure.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, sir, absolutely.
thank you.
Mhm.
Good.
Okay, any more questions for Bruce? No? All right, open up to the board to discuss.
Sign ordinances are tough. I think this is a very reasonable request. That was going to be one of my questions, was since this is not coming from staff, since it's a private application, I feel like we should be able to know exactly where this is looking to go, and it sounds like it would be applied at Depot 499, and obviously elsewhere, whoever decides they want to use it. But
Yeah, I think this makes sense for a lot of these developments, similar to Sweetwater and Depot 499, that have that walkable district, downtown, dense feeling, where they're mirroring a downtown feel. Because that's what I think of when I see this. I think of a downtown district. So I think it's very compatible with where you'd see. I mean, while it can go anywhere in town, I think where we'd see it applied makes sense.
There's a couple examples over at Fenton Mall. Yeah, so
mm-hmm.
I'd like to make a motion to approve amendment to add projecting sign types to the UDO.
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion by Sarah. We have a second by Preston. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay. So changes to the UDO passed. Okay, we'll bring up item number 2, Amanda. Possible motion regarding various amendments to the UDO again.
Yes, so this is a long summary. I'm not going to read all of that, but basically these amendments are stemming from a recent work session that Town Council had to discuss changes to advisory boards and their structure, setting a consistent term length and term limit for advisory boards. and some other changes as well. And I'm just going to go through these one by one. So for the planning board, the first one of the changes include, and you'll see it in the text in a minute, making the Apex Historical Society member a voting member instead of a non-voting member. In addition, for all the resident advisory boards, the town council would like to see youth representation on the board. In association with these amendments, there will be amendments to town code and the creation of the resident advisory board administrative policy, which will set the parameters for what is a youth representative. And so that's going to be a youth that's at least 16 years of age and who attends an Apex high school. For planning board, parks and recreation board, and the environmental advisory board, they will be a non-voting member since there's decisions being made about development related proposals. So for those boards, it will be a non-voting member. So anywhere where the ordinance references non-voting members, that changes to 10, and adding in references to the youth representative for non-voting text. Currently, the planning board does, as you know, have terms of 2 years. That is becoming the standard, consistent with the exception of the Board of Adjustment. The Board of Adjustment is receiving no changes because there's a lot that's is spoken to in state statute for a Board of Adjustment. But all of the boards will have a consistent 2-year term length, and the maximum number of consecutive terms will be 3 consecutive terms for all boards. Currently, Planning Board has 5 consecutive terms, so that will be a reduction for the Planning Board. For the youth representative, those will be appointed for a term of 1 year for a maximum of 2 consecutive terms. So basically, more or less, it'd be like their junior and senior year of high school. And then, in any questions on that so far? Yes.
So for the term limits, and I don't know everyone's term limit, but does that apply retroactively? Like if there's anybody on the board that's currently in excess of that limit, will they just?
You'll continue to serve until the term expires, your current term expires, but if you've already served 3 consecutive terms, then you would be termed out. But if you're on, and let's say you're in your 4th term, for example, you're not going to get kicked off the board. You get to continue to serve until the end of your term. Good question. And then in the removal standard, instead of specifying examples of remove for cause, that's all going to be handled in the resident advisory board administrative policy, and so just referencing that. Here we're just referencing voting members and adding the numbers after the spelling out of the years as typical. And then for secretary, just specify adding or designee as is typically done when we have a director position listed. And then in the meeting section, specifying that an additional meeting may be called by the chair or in writing by 6 members of the board. So that would be a quorum. Since we're up to 10 now, a quorum will be 6. Okay, that's all for planning board. Are there any additional questions?
How is the youth rep selected? Is there a process to that?
So for all board members, there's an application, and the mayor selects and the council affirms that. So it'd be similar to that process. And I'm not sure how that recruitment is going to go, but how that's going to be handled. But yeah, so it'd be the same process as your appointments. Okay. The Transit Advisory Committee, then that is proposed to be moved to the town code, as it doesn't have a development responsibility in its purpose. And so all of the standards will come out of the UDO and be moved to the town code. Just for your knowledge, the name of that board is proposed to be changed to the Multimodal Transportation Advisory Board. Any questions on that item? For Parks and Recreation and Cultural Resources Advisory Commission, that name is getting shorter and is being changed to Parks and Recreation Advisory Board. There is a Public Art Committee, and so that will handle the cultural resources aspect of that. And then this is one of the boards where there are duties and text that's both in the UDO and the town code. And so these are the, I don't have them listed on the screen, but this is all the things that are related to the functions in the UDO, making recommendations on fee in lieu or dedication of land for new development, for example. But so the changes in the UDO just reference the name change. Easy. And then for Apex Environmental Advisory Board, this is another where there's a lot of their standards in the town code, but where it's related to the UDO responsibilities, that's what you'll see here. Council did want to raise the threshold for rezonings that would be reviewed by the Environmental Advisory Board. The exemption from less than 1 acre to 10 acres or less. That should free up the Environmental Advisory Board to focus on other things such as environmental education and other programs, maybe look at different sections of the UDO, see what suggestions they might have for UDO amendments, instead of having 2 or 3 or more rezoning items on their agenda every month. Any questions there? And then Housing Advisory Board is proposed to be disbanded by the town council, as we have professional staff on board that serve in that capacity and advising the council on policy and affordable housing programs. And then there's other sections of the UDO that need to be changed for the name of the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board. Okay. Any other questions on the advisory board changes? Okay. I'm going to let Bruce present the last 2.
All right. The another amendment that staff is proposing today is to amend section 2.27 neighborhood notice and 2.211 public notification in order to increase the minimum distance for all neighborhood and public hearing notices from 300 feet to 500 feet. So essentially, you probably saw in your packet, and you'll see here on the slideshow that we literally just went through anywhere that it said 300 in the related section, and we changed that to 500 there. Again, from 3 to 5, from 3 to 5, 3 to 5. And the reason we did this, just to kind of speak on it too, is, there's been some public input that, more people want to be aware of what's going on in the town of Apex. They want to be more involved in the process. And so we kind of looked internal and we kind of looked outside to see what are our neighboring jurisdictions doing. So I apologize if it's a little small to read, but I'm just going to highlight some of these. These are neighboring jurisdictions and these are their notification distances. So I'll highlight Cary. Right now they're at 800 feet. That's the distance from the property that's being proposed for any type of rezoning or any type of other development. We have Wake Forest, which is at that 500 mark. We have Holly Springs, which is at that 500 feet from the property line. Morrisville, 500 feet as well. And then to get below that, really, you go to Fuquay Varina at 200 feet or Knightdale at 200 feet. And then the very lowest is Wake County, which is just the abutting properties. So, in the spirit of trying to be more inclusive and getting more people involved in the process and having a more involved community, we think that this is beneficial. And just as a reminder, Apex will send out to property owners, tenants, HOAs as well for these notices. So if you guys have any questions, I'm happy to answer on that. And just as a further example, the one on the left here, it's just follow that black ring. It's supposed to highlight the yellow. Yellow is a little hard to see on the screen, I'm sure. But with the 300-foot noticing requirement, you're only reaching about 61 properties if you were to select Town Hall as your point of reference. With the 500-foot one, you're reaching 135. So it really does increase your aspect of how many people you can talk to and reach for any type of project happening in Apex.
Thank you for showing the peer communities and what
Yeah,
their
absolutely.
standards are. That was that kind of in line with my previous question on the last item. Always curious what our surrounding or peer communities are doing.
All right. So if there's no questions for this amendment, we'll move on to the last one, and then from there you can make your motion. So amendment number 3 is to section 2.3.6 site plan to allow for linear utility infrastructure and public works projects submitted by the town to go directly to construction plans after holding a pre-application meeting. So the current process is we have exempt, minor, and major site plans. Usually these linear projects are, they happen within a corridor. They're usually for sidewalks, utilities, things like that. And what they would have to do in the past is they would submit the exempt site plan. It's just a whole other review process for them to go through. And typically, as they're building out these projects, they're working on the CDs, the construction documents, in different phases and percentages. And so what they requested from us was that we maybe change the process to make it a bit easier for them without removing any of the requirements for the review periods and making sure everything is in compliance. And so we came to a compromise that we would want them to hold a pre-application meeting, which is the standard for most development projects in the town of Apex, where they would get together with the entire technical review committee. So that's planning, utilities, water, all that. And we provide feedback on any issues we might see with this linear utility project. And they would have to address that. And after they hold the meeting, they can then submit their site construction plans for review, where they would be reviewed against the entire UDO, the design standard manual, and everything else the town and state has to offer. So that's the kind of the background for that. You can see here, in section C, under site plan, under exemptions, we did add some language. We added infrastructure, we added sidewalk improvements, and then we kind of speak to more of the linear utility structure or public works projects submitted by or on behalf of the town shall not be required to receive the administrative approval, which would be the exempt site plan approval prior to submitting the construction document. And then the only other edited section was an added section that just states under the site construction plan part of the UDO that they must be in compliance with the previous section we just talked about in order to proceed with the construction document review. So that one's a little more complicated. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Essentially, it's just kind of eliminating almost not an unnecessary, but an extra review cycle for these very limited, very specific town projects that are usually for the benefit of the public, that we can still review very accurately and very appropriately through the site construction document review.
Let me ask a question, Bruce, on that. So, does the I'm going to call it TRC, I guess,
Yep.
so to speak, that's meeting to discuss the plan. Can someone on TRC hold it up at that meeting? Here's I guess where I'm going. First of all, just for the sake of clarity, any vertical construction would not apply here, correct?
Not apply, no,
So
sir.
so even if it's a new sewer line or a new
Pump
water line,
station,
and,
anything like that has to go through.
something about that involves a vertical building, then that whole thing is out and it stays in the current process, correct?
Well, did you just say? Bus stops are probably the only vertical thing that we would allow along that. So we would allow the building and the maintaining of town of Apex bus stops.
Okay.
Shelters.
So Diane, you nailed my segue. So from there, I guess what I was thinking was, okay, so let's say it's not anything subsurface. It's an above ground infrastructure project, but in the comp plan or in a bike plan or in a greenways plan, in some policy document, there's a proposal to widen a sidewalk from traditional 5 feet to accommodate for a greenway trail, or there's some policy that's not law but is policy. And if this other department over here says, well, we've got this road widening project, or we've got, I don't know, we're adding a bus stop, or and I'm not really doing a good job of thinking of examples, but I would just hate to see where another department has the ability to bypass an adopted policy. And I mean, obviously you guys are not going to let that happen, but are we writing a way around it? Are we writing a way for another department to be able to say, and because I'm not I'm not in your shoes. I'm not in the mix, but that's kind of what I'm struggling with.
Sure.
Can you help me with that?
I think that's very fair. So one way to look at that is Apex doesn't do this specifically, but other jurisdictions, they have what's called a combo submittal, where you would essentially be able to submit your site plan and your construction drawings at the same time, and the technical review committee, the TRC, would provide the entire review that would be necessary for that at that time. So essentially, that's kind of, in theory, kind of what we're proposing here for these projects, is we're going to take the UDO, we're going to take every manual, everything we have, and we're going to throw it at this project at this site construction plan review period.
Okay.
Yeah, so they're going to have to follow all the same procedures and things like that. So no, they're not going to be able to bypass anything. They're having to follow the UDO and everything other requirement.
Okay. Yeah, and not trying to create a hard time for these folks, but just personally, I've had experiences in my previous jurisdictions where, well, the worst, where the government simply is not following its own laws.
Absolutely.
Or at best, where sometimes the local government laws and policies can just get in the way of an infrastructure project, and you're suggested that not happen, and so I'm proud to hear that that's not the case, and so yes, I would support it. It sounds like you guys did a good job of flushing that out, and obviously you want to have cooperation between agencies and departments, and but don't want to ever do anything that would put our policies in jeopardy.
And just to speak to that a little bit more, some jurisdictions also, they would allow their own plans to be submitted without a pre-application meeting, but through conversation with the planning leadership, they made a really good point that we don't always know exactly what's going on the site when you guys are designing this. We want to be able to talk to you. We want to be able to bring things to you. You want to be able to point it out, that so you're not 80% in on spending all this town money on a project and you didn't realize there was something going on here that you need to be aware of as part of this project too.
Right.
So that there was a lot of thought put into that.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, any other questions? Okay. Are there any motions?
Make a motion to approve.
Okay, got a motion to approve by Jeff,
I can second.
got a second by Sarah. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, so passing of the UDO amendments, item number 2. Okay. Okay, one more motion? To adjourn.
I'd like
Motion.
to make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
From Sarah? Was that Keith or Preston? Preston. Preston, all right. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Yeah, Preston. Aye.
All those opposed, all right. Have a good day.
All right.